One of the 23 tribal nations in New Mexico. I'm the founder and executive director of the Native woman-led nonprofit called Sovereign Energy, and we really derived from a number of needs that we saw within our own communities, including the need for capacity building, renewable energy education, policy and regulatory advocacy, as well as cultural resource protection.
So what are you trying to do?
We are empowering our individual and collective nations to create a just, interdependent, sustainable energy future, and really trying to center Native people within that, knowing that we are climate leaders since time immemorial. We have many of the answers within our own communities, and really just trying to tap back into traditional ecological knowledge and Native stewardship to help recreate and empower those practices.
That was nice. Yeah. Listen, all through the answers, Ranger Partners in the Foundation, we've been funding their projects each. But I was actually specifically asking about that agrivoltaics project, which I think is cool, and as you walk into the convention center next stop, did you see the sheep station? The sheep? It's going to walk out. Exactly. Can maybe we get a concrete example of what exactly each of your projects do? Like nuts and bolts, like what happens? Like, what are you looking for?
Well, through our Get This Daily initiative, we know that after Hurricane our city will show that it is really vulnerable during these times, and hurricanes are coming at a fast rate. And forgive me right now, I'm just all over the place because right now, as we speak, there is a hurricane that's currently traveling to our city. And so we create
With tribal nations, tribal entities, tribal orgs, environmental orgs, we really gathered, what the 4 main needs are for program areas. So tribal capacity building, again, was the biggest one. And we also want to make sure that we're in tune with the broader energy transition, but making sure that we're looking at local, culturally appropriate development strategies. And through that, we found a huge need for really engaging our community members through our traditional cultural practices, and for Pueblo people in the Southwest and many Native communities across the United States, that's farming practices. And we were really excited by the idea of an agrivoltaics array that will utilize our traditional farming practices alongside the new opportunity created through community solar legislation. And we, as an organization, brought together different tribal leaders and different community groups, tribal staff, to actually create the first community solar bill in the country that has explicitly recognized tribal provisions in respect to tribal sovereignty. So there's a huge opportunity. It really set up the market for New Mexico and really empowers tribal nations to pursue community solar projects, but we were unable to do so in a way because it's a double-edged sword. We had such good policy that we had so many companies coming in that it really kind of hurt the trust factor, the transparency, all of those different elements that a community needs to feel confident moving forward. And we found an agrivoltaics community solar array as the most viable pathway to really bringing in the elements of the Community Solar Act, as well as bringing in our traditional historical practices. So we're really excited to bring those farmers together to make sure that we're looking at dual land use, especially for an area that is really hurting for water, as much as we can, to make sure that we're just in tune with the community needs and the environmental needs, and really excited to have some sort of agrivoltaics array that taps into that, especially for Three Sisters Gardens, which is corn, beans, and squash, which is traditional for our Native communities, as well as looking at other ways that it can help the cash economy for those farmers.
For the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, back in 2020, we formed the Standing Rock Renewable Energy Power Authority, and that was specifically to be a public power authority that would exist just as the public power authorities do. So we had the foundation that we could move forward and develop the wind farm that we were talking about, 235 megawatts. We primarily were acting and are acting as a pre-developer, improving, spending the riskier dollar from philanthropy so we can improve the project. Doing the cultural siting, living like what we're talking about here, our cultural practices, what's important to us, sacred sites. particularly for our young folks. If you ever had a dream about going somewhere that's telling you to go, that's your vision, so that you can be connected to the earth. It's very important that we maintain that in everything that we're doing at Sage for all of our energy projects, because that must remain intact. As you have churches, the earth is our church. The earth is where we pray. The earth is where we interconnect from. We believe, as a lot of folks do in the indigenous world, is that from the earth to the stars, where our relatives lie, is what we must protect. So as we move through the process of developing projects, primarily 235 megawatts of wind, we had to set up top high ridge lines, and we worked with our THPO to site all of those. And as we continue to move through the process, we found out as we started building roads and interconnection that we had to move that. So it's like, geez, you guys should have told us that we had 5 sites instead of 26 sites. You know, there were 200 grand, but that's development, right? So as we move into a second area and then to a third area that has much greater wind, we're currently looking at about 47.5 net capacity factor for our wind project. And that's important because that's going to feed our economy to help rebuild our infrastructure. If you take a look at tribal nations, one of the first red line communities actually started off as war camps. As we can talk about our heredity and where we've come from, we had to fight to survive, to hold on to places and locations where we are. Those were the worst locations that didn't have any farming available, the land wasn't rich, but we made it work because those are our homelands to start with. So as we continue to make these things work, rebuilding and refinancing into our communities is paramount for Sage Development Authority. So we're looking at 20 years of revenue coming back from this wind farm back to the tribe. And initially, as we were looking at doing the pre-development, we might own maybe 5%, 3 to 5% of the wind farm. But when IRA rolled out, and now the direct pay opportunity gives us an ability to finance tribes up to 80%, possibly 100% of the loan for building like our wind project, which is currently slated at $471 million. We could possibly be bringing in up to $225 million over 20 years. That's a real significant investment by our own choice and how we're going to reinvest that back into our communities. Financial institution building, land, home mortgage opportunities for our trust land, buying our own land back within our own reservation boundaries. Because I think a lot of people may think that, you know, on a reservation, we have 2.3 million acres, but we own 30% of it. That's what we're working with. So how do we energize our communities and the economic hardships that our people have historically been forced into? We were forced into dependency. So we're climbing our way back out by using renewable energy to do it. So foundational, along with REC, you know, were able to give us panels we started putting on our 8 community district buildings and Head Starts. So they'll use the savings to give back to the kids, to give back to the community. We're putting electric vehicle charging stations in all of our communities so that we can build the transit system aside the petroleum-based one we already have. So that's making renewable energy work for our common people, our Ikchea. I hope to be Ikchea all my life, which is common, nothing special. And that is a good thing. So how do we do that for our people, making renewables help even the most economically hard hit of us at Standing Rock? And we hope that this is something that is not just a tribal deal, but if communities around this country can coalesce around a resource and agree to use that resource to build renewable energy, to be a commercial project like we're doing, then that makes a difference in rural America. Because the brain drain is something real. And we have to have a level of balance as we take a look at metropolitan versus rural areas, where we get our energy from, where we deliver our energy to, and what does that relationship look like? It's very critical for us to think like this, not just in measures of what the profit margin is going to be, but how do you interact with the tribal nation or community to increase the value of life and the world that we live within. So we take a look at this with my board of directors and decided we want to be an energy innovation location. So we put in for a ton of grants. We just got the hydrogen feasibility sit right alongside the Missouri River. And one of the treaty rights is that we didn't want to quantify our water. And they were trying to force us to quantify our water, saying you can use only so many acre feet per year. But we held on to that treaty right and said no. So now with the opportunity to take a look at feasibility for hydrogen, we can use that for a nitrogen agricultural manufacturing opportunity, clean, and also the fuel. So how do we build that in a way that's in good relationship with the earth, our children, building the capacity that we're talking about in all of our communities, and the educational opportunities that are there. We're very excited this last quarter, we were hired 3 apprentices to start putting solar onto roofs. And their families were so excited because this was reality now. It wasn't just dreaming about it or thinking of it in the long-term strategic plan, what are the goals, but it started to hit. And that's what's fantastic. And that's what's great about being on a panel like this, is the opportunity to talk about these realities as they occur in parts of the country that have been most forgotten, most neglected, or even put aside, put away. And we're all working to have equity in our homes for our relatives, for our communities. And that's something that I think we all think about. What's our family sent into us? So I'm very happy that you came to sit with us and have this conversation. Thanks.
Each of you talked about your communities, right? Whether it's whether it's New Orleans to New Mexico to a 230 megawatt wind farm, in a place where you're talking about 47-48% capacity. That's fantastic. But when you guys started the journey, let's probably go there, because renewable has a fantastic value proposition, and sometimes there is skepticism around that. So talk us through some of the challenges that you have to face to actually lay out and convince the communities where you're working about the value proposition, and what challenges still remain.
For me, as I stated before, the community is the last to get any resources or any education on anything that's going on. And so when the idea of this initiative came, like, community members understands that there is a need for this. However, I can take it back to Katrina, when a lot of contractors came down and they offered community residents to put solar panels on their roofs and talked about all the great things and why you should have solar panels. Well, what happened was, and personally I can speak to my dad, they installed these solar panels, and maybe they were just like independent contractors, didn't install them correctly, and he has got a leak in his roof, and tried to find the contractors to fix it, and they're nowhere to be found. So then when you fast forward now to after Hurricane Ida and the benefits of this initiative, a lot of community members are totally against solar panels at this point because of what they went through and the damages that it caused to their homes, and there's nobody there to fix it. And so the challenge is explaining to the community the benefits that it has for the environment. They don't want to hear it because we're left to fend for ourselves anyway. And even when you're talking to a restaurant owner, they're still, those small restaurant owners are still community members, right? And so even telling them the benefits of that, they don't want to hear it. It's a situation because there is a gap, right? There's a gap between the higher ups and the community, right? And so maybe if there's a situation where the higher ups can kind of meet the community where they are, and just start building those relationships, leveraging the voices, taking the data and listening to the stories and being transparent, because for myself, even being a community member, and they know who I am, me is like they're no longer looking at me as a community member. They're looking at me as T from Feed the Second Line, and that's your job, right? And it's my job is going to help them. It's going to help the community. And so I feel the biggest challenge is trust. The biggest challenge is trust and just trying to work with, community leaders, even, people around the world to come into the schools, come into the churches. Like, that's where you will find community members, but also partner with organizations like Feed the Second Line. Even when I go to those restaurant owners and I tell them, Feed the Second Line, we're going to give you these solar panels and this battery system. In their mind, they're like, it has to be something in it for you. What are you getting out of it? And I'm not getting anything out of it. Like, this is going to help us. Like, we can't just up and leave. This is our home. So what can we do to get prepared? So for me, the biggest challenge is getting the community on board because they're so far behind that they don't understand. And to try to hurry up and catch them up so they can get on board, that's the biggest challenge. And it's the trust, and so every day, what I like to say, out on the highways and byways, just trying to educate the community and help them to understand. And so when we have panels like this is great to talk to you all, but you all know all so well what exactly is going on. So we can, try to arrange things like this in communities where you have a community member, you have the expert, and once they see, okay, at some point the trust will build, but coming to them, coming to the community. So again, back to the question, my biggest barrier is trust and the lack of knowledge within the community and the gap in funding.
Yeah, building off that, we always say in our work that relationships move at the speed of trust. And when we, in this room, in this conference, we all think we're the good guys, right, with renewable energy. And more often than not, we might not be viewed as the good guys still. We're still part of a legacy of 5 centuries of energy injustice. And it's really important to look at it through that lens, to remember that, more often than not, these communities have been hurt by energy development, and energy development that is exported from their lands that doesn't benefit them. And we often look at, you get revenue from it, you can profit from it, but there's a cost to that too. And sometimes communities may not necessarily be driven by that profit because they see the inflow of money almost doing more harm than good, or in a way that's really compromising values. And so in this work, we need to make sure that we're really looking at what the community needs are first. Especially working with Native communities, it's really difficult because our tribal leaders and staff are always weighing a number of different factors. Capacity building is the hardest one, and when I talk about that, what I mean is our tribal leaders and all of those working, they have whole communities to take care of, and we just are still coming out of a global pandemic where we lost many of our members. We're still hurting for that. We still have education and healthcare and a number of needs to look at. So working with tribes, all I can recommend too is just make sure that you are moving at that speed of trust, that you're being really mindful of how many different priorities that these communities have, and making sure that you're really understanding their needs first. It's not necessarily to have energy development, and more often than not, it's really just making sure that you're looking at how many different priorities that they have to tend to. So as an organization, we work to help the tribes vet all of the different companies. I get calls, that a tribal administrator will say they have a stack of 12 proposals on their desk and they don't know where to start. And it's really looking at, how we can help a tribe ask the right questions. So we even have, formulas and worksheets, flyers, all of these, here are the questions that we recommend you ask the companies. Here are the questions about ownership and transparency and making sure that operations and maintenance of projects, and all of those different things that really come, back to the community of helping build their own confidence and their ability to select and proceed with the project. So just making sure that, we're being very careful and helping build those bridges as well, and, recommending, working with local nonprofits, working with those who know our communities best to even help, facilitate that process, because ultimately, we all want renewable energy, we all feel a rush, to meet these huge climate goals that we need to, but we need to work together better to be able to achieve that.
I would say exactly what you two just said, and I couldn't have said it any better. I'm thinking a little bit about my people is that, trust, capacity building, education is key in having people understand what the expectations are. What are the jobs we can provide realistically? What are we looking at? What are the homes we can help finance? What are the infrastructure needs of our roads, our hospitals? How can we really be assistive in this space and not compete with the tribe, because the tribe's supposed to do these things. We're a tribal entity built to do some of the same things as well. So how much can we chunk off and say we really can achieve these goals here? So as we look to, like we have the solar panels that came in, starting to put those up, the expectations and also the relationships, because it's not just tribal people that live on tribal lands. Our lands were checkerboarded back in 1844 by the Dawes Act, so we have ranchers, we have non-natives, and our land is incongruent, so we have to have that relationship with the state, also with the feds, also with the tribe, and then also with social media, So, but it's really an educational process of getting all of these three to agree to say that this is a common path or a common goal that we have moving forward. So communication and education and coalescing around common goal is really key, in this space, but we have to do it in three different spaces. And so what are your resource allocations, what are you going to put forward, in the budget this year to get these things done? But I think for most communities that are doing this work, if there wasn't philanthropy, we couldn't get it done at all. We couldn't get off jump, to start these kinds of things. So that's something I also want to put out there to you and for the corporations that you work with. If we're looking to develop this kind of thing, give and receive. It's a relationship, and how do we build that moving forward so that we can build the communication, so that we can have the trust, we can build the capacity and the understanding, the education, and the awareness of where we're going together.
Winding down our time. So I'll ask each of you guys one more question and then we'll wrap up, I think. That's fine. So maybe starting with Mayane, though, and this kind of touches on what you were just talking about, but what are best practices for working on tribal lands? Like if people are looking to work with tribal communities, what are best practices? Or are there any? You're both like, oh god.
The native queue to go first. I think, it really is just making sure that, looking at those different organizations, not to, tout ours, but, their community knows community best. We, have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders as community members to do what's best for our relatives. So, recommend reaching out to nonprofits, tribally led organizations, local organizations. Tribes are really open as well to consultation and collaboration. I think the problem is more often than not people are a little bit hesitant to reach out, and that perpetuates the existing problem. So, recommend reaching out, having those folks on your team to do a lot of that outreach and engagement support, to find ways within your own projects to help support, community goals again, whether that's through a community benefits plan or something else. But really recommend, doing that early outreach. So from a project inception, pre-development phase to reach out. And that really, you'll find, I think more often than not, that tribes want to work with you. They want to support you. So, and then also just to make sure that, even with as a company, perhaps looking at some cultural competency trainings, cultural sensitivity trainings internally, really understanding the concept of sovereignty, because the number one to make sure that we're all meeting our shared goals.
I couldn't say anything better than what you just said. Working with tribes is exactly everything Mayane just mentioned in that space because it is about building that trust. But one thing I will say is that for tribal nations, transmission was built around us. We have a 345 kV line that runs through Standing Rock. Thank God, because it puts it in proximity to make our wind farm feasible. But industry means policy. We know that. Coal industry, policy. Oil, policy. Everything's built around the dollar. So if we're going to push renewable energies, we really need to think about Native nations and the opportunity and the potential that we represent and have that conversation that we had just mentioned with tribal nations and with the legislatures that we're talking to. Who at the Senate are we having this conversation with? Where are the rooms where this needs to be discussed? Is that all that land that this tribe represents this much megawatts of wind or solar or geothermal or renewables. So with that, I'll say push that in and then have the real conversation with tribes like Mayane just mentioned.
Is it Tinice that you've been building resilience hubs in New Orleans?
Yes.
And can you talk about why philanthropy is the solution here as opposed to, as Joe was saying, policy as opposed to government action or something like that? Like, why is philanthropy the best role in this case?
I would say that would be the best one in this case. When you're in the trenches of the community, there's all those different moving parts. And so having people involved and being able to contribute in a way that is not so restricted, if that makes sense. Because when it is restricted, then we're only restricted to address one need when there's 1,000 other needs that need to be addressed. So just being able to, it's important because then we're not limited and we can just address those needs because we actually know what the needs are.
Just in the philanthropy can better address that
Yes.
in this case because there's greater flexibility.
Greater flexibility, and that's what we need.
It's perfect. Well, that basically brings us to the end of our time for this panel. So thank you so much, Sonia, for bringing us together. Thank you guys for listening to what projects that we're each working on here. Is there anything you'd like to add to wrap this up?
No, I just think that this is great. I mean, we should not stop this with just listening to these three amazing people just from this room, because there is a lot that we have to carry from this room, right? There's a lot and there's a lot that the sector needs to still do in order to build those trusts, which is the core that you guys talked about. And we have a call to action. We need to take the call to action back to our respective homes and not